Hello, and welcome to the Mystic Chat. So today or tonight or wherever you're listening or watching, we are slightly tweaking our show, our format just a little bit. Um, we are going to progress, to evolve to where all of our guests going forward and our conversations are going to be about doing things for our community, changing ourselves, changing each other, changing the uh, world, because that's what magic and paganism and witchcraft is all about change. So I am one of your hosts. My name is Reverend Chris Allen. A little bit about me is I am an ordained minister with the Fellowship of the Phoenix. I'm also a published author. And I do this show with all you wonderful people, and allow me to introduce our other host. I was almost going to say second host, but that's not correct. It's our other host, Frater Aaron. Aaron, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Aaron. I forgot the armchair today, so I'm a magician in a roller chair today. I'm out in Houston, Texas right now. I'm a mentor with the Fellowship of the Phoenix, and you got me there for now.
And I would like to introduce our very special guest, David Salisbury. Is that how you say it, Salisbury? I mispronounce everything.
Yeah, that's one of the three ways you can say it, and I interchange them myself every day. So, yep, you're on.
So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and what's happening.
Oh, gosh. Let's see. Well, I like long walks in the graveyard.
Oh, me too.
I like candy. No. Well, hi, everyone. David. I use he, him pronouns. I live out in Baltimore, Maryland. I work primarily in Washington, D.C., doing a lot of nonprofit political work, specializing in LGBTQ justice. And around my local community in Baltimore, outside of my day job, I also do a lot of local queer organizing, primarily with my queer leather club, Command MC, and we raise funds for local charities and put on cool events. So between those two things, life is pretty busy right now, but all very service oriented for the most part. So that's my thing, and where I try to keep my focus for the most part.
That's awesome. Okay, so I want to talk about witchcraft activism. I will say your book. Let me just find the cover here. I was trying to find the cover of your book for the promo, but the file kept saying, "Oh, this picture, it's too small. It's too small." So I said, "I'll just use your pretty face." Let me find the cover here. Here we go. Here we go. So here's the cover. You may not be able to see it, but I think so. But anyway, witchcraft activism. So I personally think that if you're publicly a witch or LGBTQ, and you're an activist. So I want to know, what's the book about, how it came to be, and why you wrote it.
Yeah, it actually has kind of an unconventional story from all my other books, because the original idea to do it was actually not my own. It was my publisher, Wiser Books. When I had already done a few books through Moon Books, and I had started the process of pitching a different kind of idea to Wiser, and they came back at me, and they were like, "Yeah, so this idea is really great and everything, but you're already known so much throughout the community for doing organizing work and activism and justice stuff. So why don't you have an activism book out? Seems like that would be a great place to go with us. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. It just never occurred to me. You know, sometimes you're like enmeshed in whatever your own world is so much that you don't really think about like doing projects that put that work outside of your own brain and just kind of your day-to-day things. So yeah, they were right. It was felt really natural, kind of an awkward process at first, actually, like putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard about my process and really kind of breaking down in a way that is coherent and sensible for other people to read looking on. But that's what really great editors are for. so that they helped me a lot with that. So yeah, it was a really cool, interesting process working with them and putting something out that really should never have been mine alone to sit in my brain about. So I felt really good about being able to put something out there that hopefully someone else out there would pick up and find some use from and create some change. And yeah, I think it's going good.
So, you know, I'm looking at the chapter that's called Magic for Change. I think that's so, you know, when you're a brand new witch and you learn about the basics, about the crystals, the stones, the sun, the moon, and they teach you in the books or whatever about magic is for change. And the change is I need a job, or I need a relationship, or I need whatever. It's never, I need to change my community. I need to change the people. I need to change oppression. So talk about how the change. Let me use my words here. How do we use magic to for change and the realm of activism?
So the approach that I wanted to take, not just with that book, but with you know, in-person training and organizing that I do, is that every time you step out of your house or even log on to the internet, you're doing something that's creating change and creating ripple effects all around you. You know, every day we make all types of choices. So, you know, as someone who very strongly believes that magic works the best on paths of least resistance, or in other words, methods and modalities that we can weave into things that we're already doing seamlessly. That's where we can usually see the most immediate tangible change. So that's the reason why when you look in that book, it doesn't hit you right away with spells and rituals and sigils like that. I wanted to really break down what community organizing activism looks like, and what are natural ways that we can weave the work of the witch into there. You know, so I talk about things like letter writing. You know, seems like one of the most mundane mortal things anyone could ever do. Okay, but here's how you make your letter a talisman when you're sending it out. So things like that. So there's very little speaking in strange tongues and waving swords around, and more things that on the surface people might find very boring and benign. But you know, in organizing work, that's where the core of this stuff is. It's, you know, the people who are sweeping the floors at the end of the night at the community center, who are making the most tangible change, you know, the boring stuff that we might not think about all the time. So that was the approach I wanted to take.
That's awesome. You know, I know what usually happens is that we're all fired up about something like, oh, Trump did this, or the white supremacists did that, or blah blah blah. We get fired up, right? So how do we take this passion, this magic, this energy, and use your book to channel it in the appropriate way?
Mhm. Well, whenever the topic of anger and rage comes up, the big thing that I always tell people is let go of the idea that you should kind of discard that or banish that from yourself, or that those feelings are toxic. This is really tricky in the witchcraft community because we're also kind of fused with the New Age community, which is very separate in a lot of ways, but in other ways very woven into ours. And in a lot of parts of those communities, it's, oh, anger and rage will not serve you at all. It won't do anything positive. Get rid of it, and blast the world with love. Well, I completely disagree with that. I think that, you know, no human emotion is wrong or negative. We can do something useful with anything that we're feeling, and anger can be extremely motivating. Now, the trick is how to put that in a space that's of use, and in a space where that fire isn't going to burn you out into a cinder. So when it comes to being fired up about something, I first say, okay, sit with that type of anger, and how can you have an outlet for that that's useful and relevant and serving the goal that you're trying to achieve first. So you always have to make it about the goal rather than you. I think, you know, an unfortunate side effect of social media, even though that has very useful purposes in organizing too, is that, you know, there's so much pain and suffering in the world, and it feels cathartic to, you know, just scream about it on Facebook or get into online flame wars. And I'm completely guilty of that too. You know, I'm not some ascended enlightened being myself, but when I feel those things, I think, okay, I need to put the direction on something that matters, rather than, you know, feeling, hopefully not feeling my own ego or my own need to kind of like let this out. So, you know, you apply anger in some ways into the same directions as you would apply love, you know, so that's where we get those ideas about righteous anger, you know. So an anger that is justified, and it's right and centered,
Yes.
that, and is directed to a specific point to focus on, that is hopefully going to correct or right or restore whatever wrong has happened.
Frater, Aaron, I think you had some questions, didn't you?
Sure. So let's say I have that passionate anger in this moment, and I take a candle and use an orange pen to carve Trump's name in it and light it up and say all these awful things that I'm thinking, you know, that should happen to him, you know, in this hypothetical situation. And I talk to it the whole time the candle's burning down. Is that enough? Or then should we be backing that up with a mundane action, such as putting that message into a more professionally worded email, or as you talk about the power of written letter, actually. But yeah, is the magic action enough, or do we need to be backing it up with physical action as well?
You know, I think magic on its own is always going to do something, but in terms of it being most effective, I would say yes, absolutely pair it with that, for two tactical reasons. One is that, as I mentioned before, magic and energy work follows the path of least resistance. So if you're tying it to a physical action that you're doing, you're then taking that power that you sent out into the world of spirit, and you're grounding it into physical actions. So they're, tying those two things together. And this is the same for so many different types of magical work, especially healing. Like most people wouldn't think twice about, making a healing remedy and herbal tea, and then, empowering that as a potion. And the other reason is that it helps focus your energy in a way that doesn't send it out in the form of like radio static noise or chaos, as I like to say. The tricky part with working with anger and rage, and even passion in general. We often hear about love spells that go awry. One of the reasons for those horror stories is that passion is this fiery, kind of uncontrollable energy, similar to anger and rage is. So instead of just spewing your power out and hoping that it hits some target, focusing it on something physical here in the earthly realm will help you make sure that you're not wasting your time.
I have your book here on my little trusty iPad here. And one of the things, so I'm a Gemini, and so I have a little, and plus I'm a psycho pomp. And so I have a special affinity to Hermes and to Mercury. And you have a spell here that I find very interesting. It's called a spell for mercurial voice. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so one of the most difficult things that people encounter when they want to do any sort of advocacy work is trying to figure out what their own voice is and what it has to say. There's so many different types of activism and advocacy out there. There's people who do that work through poetry and spoken word. There's other people who do in-person community event organizing, and others who get into political campaigning. So in order to find something that's going to feed you, because this work always has to feed you, otherwise you're going to burn out, which is a constant threat in activism work. Constant, never goes away. So you have to be mindful of that. And doing work that helps you find your voice also just simply makes you more effective, for the reason that we're not going to be good at every type of thing. There's many forms of activism that I will just never be good at, but there are other things that are perfectly suited for my specific voice. So aligning with deities and spirits like Hermes, Mercury is a really useful way to figure out, hey, what type of messenger am I in this world? And what is the message that I'm trying to communicate?
I think it's so important because especially during 2020, and I'm one of those people, I'm going to say it. If you're upset, if you feel oppressed, riot. Riot. Do I condone violence against people? Absolutely, I do not condone violence against people. But do I believe in screaming and raising hell? Yes, because one of the things that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was criticized about was the peaceful protest, because a lot of his critics said that white people, white cis straight heteronormative people, don't listen to a sit-in. They listen to when you damage their property and they have to pay for something. So when you talk about the mercurial voice and the power of the voice, one thing about like the protests in 2020, I attended a few of them, and and there were the people who were inspiring with their voice, and then there were people who were just screaming for no reason, and you started to tune those people out. I was on their side, but you turned out, just like you said before, the static. So I think it's really important that people understand the power of the voice, why that spell is so obvious yet so hard at the same time. That spell is important, and you know, I think in activism, it's so vital that we learn how to say what we're trying to say. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And in those protests that you're talking about, and I was definitely in the heart of those in DC when that was happening. And you know, I think actions like that, you know, when they get criticism about, oh, what did that actually do? Because, you know, for example, Trump still was sworn in as president. So they may say, oh, what was the point of all that? I take the position that actions like that were amazing and useful for us as
Yes.
a resistance movement. So I didn't see that waking up that morning and going with my sign out into the streets of DC. I never went into that, and I think hardly anyone at all did, with the expectation that, you know, we're gonna stop this fascist from taking over today. But we went because that in itself was a huge community spell of trying to figure out alignment around what our voice is, what is this movement that we're trying to build, what does it say? So I think that was kind of a magical catalyst for that.
100%. I mean, like, I've always done some activism. When Trump happened, I did a lot of activism, and not just for, you know, politics, for all kinds of things. Fred or Aaron, I know you got something.
Sure. I'm thinking about how, you know, throughout history, it was out of necessity that a lot of groups turned to witchcraft and protest. And, you know, I don't know if this is my skewed view or not, but it seems like that might be less now. And so, but I think there are witches out there who are, you know, relatively comfortable and are used to having a more introspective practice, and who hear this concept and would want to get involved, but may say, like, I don't know, nothing, you know, I don't feel that passionately about a specific issue. What do you think are some magical ways that people can find causes or work with the land to find out what's needed?
I mean, in terms, so kind of hearing like two different questions in a way, you know, in terms of what's needed, I always like to think locally first, see what's happening in your neighborhood, your city, and then a bit wider on the state level too. You know, as you mentioned, politics aren't the only thing, you know, well, in terms of like campaign electoral politics, you know, everything is politics in a way, but, you know, there's things you can do like volunteering at your local food bank or soup kitchen, like, you know, that is a direct action in my eyes and in the eyes of a lot of activists. And you know, in terms of magical work, that's a great example about you know, witches who are more introspective or might have more of a kind of somber personal practice that's focused on inward transformation, do magical work that is based on learning and education then. So if you have a very meditative practice, and you might be like an ascendance enlightenment based witch, for example, you know, okay, then I would love to see you do magic focusing on helping attract resources and educational materials to help you unravel and explore personal privilege, internalized racism, internalized homophobia, whatever it might be, because knowledge is power. And the more of us who are educated on these issues, the more we kind of raise our society up to a higher level, and then take that knowledge that you've gained and give that to other people, have conversations. It might start out slow at first, you're educating your very well-meaning mother about pronouns, for example, who just like might not get that whole pronoun thing and why it's important. Tiny little activism there. And then you can take that education further and be a little more radical and maybe say, confront the racist uncle at Thanksgiving. So, you can apply this work to really anything. I don't care if you're the most introverted, shy, humble person who's ever walked the face of the earth. There is a place for you in the resistance movement.
I'm glad you said that, because how I was always introduced to witchcraft and magic. It was always a spiritual practice, and it kind of annoys me. And maybe I'm the old guy who's out of touch, but I don't care. It annoys me how there are some people who become a witch or a magician because they want to have a power over, and that power with the community. It annoys me. And to be honest, part of the reason I want to have authors such as yourself on the show is to teach us and myself how to do that, how to have power with the community, because spiritual power is not pie. It's like air. We can all breathe the air. We're not hoarding it, and I think, I could sit here and talk about what I think about the people who try to hoard the power all day. But that being said, you have another section called building and joining communities. So my question is, though, so it's a two-part question. The first part is, if I'm isolated, I'm all by myself, or let me rephrase, I think I'm isolated, I think I'm all by myself, and I'm not sure how to begin. How do I build a community? How do I join a community? What does that look like? And if I'm at the outgoing type, how do I find that inspiration and that drive?
Yeah, in my experience, locally, when you find one little thing, something usually leads to another little thing and then another. And, these change makers out there are often of similar or like minds. So you'd be really surprised how fast you make a connection, that example I gave earlier about food banks and soup kitchens. There are just hundreds and hundreds of those all around the country. Very unfortunately that we need so many. But that's one example of a really great way locally to get involved. When I first moved to the DC area 13 years ago, outside of my regular day job, the first thing I did was volunteer at a local food bank, because partly it was that I didn't know anyone and someone recommended it as a great way to make friends. Like, oh, because you're gonna make friends with people who are compassionate and are spending their mornings doing that before work. And I did. And then those friends introduced me to this other local community organization, and they introduced me to this local protest group. And then I learned that there were whole magical aspects to the community that were also doing magical advocacy type work. And I got connected with those people. And that's kind of how my path in that specific work of fusing magic and activism together started. So yeah, you'll be really surprised where the trail leads once you start.
So how do I find that fire within? Because I can Canberra in my 20s and even in my early 30s, I'm like, I want to do something, but where do I begin? Where do I look? What do I do? I'm not sure. So how do we start that process?
I would say dip your toes into a variety of different things. You want to find a good balance of something that you're very passionate about, obviously, because, if you're not that passionate about it, then you're just going to fall away from it and not have motivation to get out there and help, because, helping is often not very glamorous, and sometimes you just don't want to do it. So you need to do something that you're passionate about, but at the same time, you have to have a balance, because you don't want to do something that is so emotionally overwhelming to you that it then burns you out. The example that I'll give is before I moved to the DC area doing like electoral and legislative work, I got my kind of grown-up job start with animal rights organizations. It's kind of a early passion of mine since I was a kid. And that was all I wanted to do for my big grown-up job. And I finally got my big grown-up job at an animal rights organization. And I did that for 3 years. And not only was the work incredibly taxing, which it usually is when you're working full-time in nonprofit, but I was so emotionally devastated and overwhelmed all the time about the things that I was seeing that I just burnt out so fast, and my work started slipping, and I felt like I was in danger of becoming desensitized. And then I had the fortune of having a really good professional mentor at the time who was like, have you thought about doing a different type of cause-based work that's not this, that you're still passionate about, but isn't going to, make you cry yourself to sleep every night? So I switched to doing more LGBTQ-based focused work. And I still do that animal rights work, but when I have the emotional, mental bandwidth for it.
Yeah.
So, and it's going to be trial and error. You're going to sometimes do things that are just going to make you cry yourself to sleep at night sometimes. So there's a little bit of a risk and a vulnerability involved there, but resilience is a super useful skill to build up. And that's something that magic is incredibly useful for, right? Like these very basic energetic workings that we all learn about at the beginning of our craft that hopefully we're all keeping up with, grounding, centering, drawing strength from the cosmos and nature. These are very grounding, stabilizing things that will hopefully keep us centered and resilient for when we do have those wildly emotionally devastating experiences.
Yeah, I wanted to admit I enjoyed that you mentioned on one-to-one meetings and lobbying experience that there are times you're going to walk away from a meeting feeling deflated, like, this isn't what I had in mind at all, and how important it is to be able to cultivate that resilience. It's interesting and really helpful how pretty much the first part of the book, like you said, it starts out simple. It's almost like activism 101, I think, for us magical people who don't know much about it. But then towards the end, we're in the Key of Solomon, and we're summoning offensive spirits. So it goes through quite a journey, before even getting into the history section.
But Weiser had to the very wise choice in their publishing wisdom to calm me down a bit, because originally I had some more aggressive approaches in there, but we thought, let's keep this a nice slim intro volume, and then we can get into some of the more dramatic stuff in a later work maybe. But
yeah, hopefully that's a part 2.
Yeah, we'll see.
So, towards the end of the book, you talk about the magical war. Then you for talk about like women's liberation. Then you talk about prayers to the LGBTQ dead, and then things like that in the 21st century and today. And so how to apply that magic. So where we are today, where we are with all the bullshit that's happening. And I feel like every time you turn on the news, there's something new, you know, where we are, how do we channel our energy, or how do we focus on everything's going on, because it's overwhelming sometimes. So for today, if I'm like, I want to do something magic, I'm going to apply your teachings in the book, but I don't know where to apply it. How do I apply it? How do I begin that process?
Well, first of all, everyone should be very careful about falling into the trap of doom scrolling and just clicking on the TV news and getting inspiration of what to do from those sources. It never leads anywhere good. It's just going to make you feel defeated. You know, this is where building community is useful, so that you can know what needs there are in your own area. But if you're not there, you know, you can get on local community groups. Like in my area where I live in Baltimore, there's a really cool mutual aid group on Facebook that does things like, oh, this elderly or disabled person needs a lift to the grocery store. It'll have things like that. And then other people will post things like, okay, we need someone to come to the local community center and make placards for this march that's happening. So just like really runs the gamut of things. So try to get connected to groups like that, and just see not only what inspires you, but something that also you're physically able to do, because this is another thing that can sometimes turn people off from activism when they're not really sure what it is. Because, you know, we think of an activist and we usually think, okay, marching strongly in the streets, you know, that's a very ableist view in a lot of ways, right? You know, so there are always ways that we can help that match, you know, our ability differences, our age levels, combined with things that inspire us. So kind of like look at all of that and put that together in kind of a big picture or puzzle piece of, okay, what are the types of actions that suit all of those things that are just right for me? You'll probably find that there are quite a few of them.
Okay.
Are there changes you would have made, or updates you would make if the book had come out after the reversal of Roe versus Wade?
Oh, a great question. Well, I definitely would have talked about it, because for one, I absolutely never in my wildest dreams would have imagined that that would have happened.
Right.
And I'm in this work in DC all the time. So yeah, you know, I would have probably addressed the topic of larger systems of power a bit more. So, you know, that was a result of an extremely large system of power, the Supreme Court, for example. And how do we deal with that, not only as activists, but as citizens, looking at a very, very small group of people saying, this is the way it is, and bam, you have absolutely no power to change that whatsoever. Like, how do we reconcile with something like that as human beings? So, you know, I would have addressed the importance of working small when there is a Goliath standing in front of you. You know, like, what are the stones around you? You know, so Roe v. Wade, for example, when that happened, you saw the reproductive justice community immediately going to the state and local level saying, okay, how can we protect our local centers? How can we get people who have the ability to reproduce access to the services and the care that they need, as well as anyone who has healthcare needs, because all of that stuff is under attack. And then you saw all of this very localized organizing happening at a super micro level. And that's been really beautiful to see. And in a lot of ways, I think that's really, more powerful work than, say, hexing Supreme Court justices until they die so that we can get new ones on the bench, which, sure, I support that. So if you want to do that, go ahead. But but in terms of like immediate things that you can do right now, work on those micro levels.
I do believe in what you've been saying this whole time about action is where the power is. And a lot of people, I think the only way I can do a magical ceremony is I have the herbs, have the crystals, have the fire and the smoke and all that. What people don't really realize is every time you do something, you're putting energy out into the universe. I mean, that's a magical act. And so I think, I can see people who think, oh, everything you're saying doesn't sound magical, but it is, and by walking or by, doing all these community things, I like to think as witches exude magic, which I think we do. And so every time we do something, it's like in ceremonial magic. Every time you do a gesture, it has a magical influence. So by getting into your car, going to talk to people, having meetings, having community building, that's an act of power. I have a question because I'm very curious. So, tell me about the magic of the activism ancestors. What is that about?
Oh yeah, well, there's this concept in many witchcraft traditions of the mighty dead or the elevated dead, right? Who we might think of as our tradition's version of saints, so witches before us who have done some sort of great or notable work, who most likely have some sort of community interest in staying behind or having part of their consciousness behind to be meant as guides. Those are really powerful forces that we can work with for change, not only because of what they did in their lives, but because ancestral powers, because these entities were embodied humans at some point, really understand what life was like, what human needs are like, so angel magic, for example, something that you learn about when you're doing angelic magic is that work is really wonderful for like elevating states of consciousness and gaining knowledge and power and things like that, but might not be the best work to do for filling your pantry or getting a job. So when we work with ancestral spirits and powers, whether they were the mighty dead of witches or just completely secular humanist or atheistic activist ancestors, we can call upon them to help us not only influence the workings that we're doing, but also inspire us to, so we can call upon them and say, help give me resilience. That's a big one, especially for ancestral powers that were doing this for their entire lives. They must have had some sort of tricks up their sleeves to keep them doing that work for their whole lives without burning out before they passed. So they can help us with that. In terms of finding our voice that we were talking about earlier, that's incredibly helpful too. The powers of the dead are really excellent for swaying subtle things about our personalities and our influence in the world. So those are some of the top of the things that come to mind. But yeah,
that's awesome.
The opportunities there are really just like very, very endless.
I will love it. Frederick, Aaron, did you have any last questions?
Yeah, following along with that, I did have a request from a circle mate about using thought forms in activism, which you mentioned in the book, and if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so creating a thought form, for folks who don't know, is the magical act of channeling and focusing your personal goal, your cone of power, into a created entity, and its consciousness is your consciousness, so it's completely aligned for and only for your goal. So their name is a spirit servitor, is another name that you'll hear, and you send that entity out for its specific task, and then it comes back or vanishes when it's completed its task. And there's a lot of really powerful magical historical precedents with this. I think I use this example in the book, but the magical theosophical societies in Britain during the Second World War utilized thought forms to protect the island from invasion from Nazis. So these magical societies would put out letters, physical letters to all their members saying, okay, here's our thought form working for this week. We want you to imagine shining knights patrolling the landscape of the shores all around Britain, standing guard to make sure that the Nazis don't land and invade. And indeed, they never did step foot fully on shore. So yeah. Oh, it's blurry, but I think I can see what you're...
You can kind of tell what it is. Yeah,
I know what it is, but you might...
Well, what is it?
Dion Fortune, Sacred, the Magical Battle of Britain, for anyone interested in learning more about that. The whole working papers were published by Kenneth Grant, I believe, and it's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and really timely and imminent too, because of course we just lost Angela Lansbury, and for anyone who's seen Bedknobs and Broomsticks, that was a big inspiration for me as a kid, because the major apex of the plot in that movie was her raising thought forms as knights in armor to battle back the Nazis. So that was inspired by those workings.
I haven't seen that movie since I was probably 7. I should go back and watch it again. So really quickly, one last question. We have a few minutes left. Can you talk about conjuring the spirits of defense and why we should conjure the spirits of defense, and who are they? What's going on with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like any sort of magical working that you're doing, you always want to make sure that you're protecting and shielding your own personal energy, your body, your community. I like talking about that because it's perfectly aligned with physical activist work. So folks who do any sort of community rally or marching work, apologies, there's a loud siren going through. I don't know, sometimes Zoom is really good at buffering.
I can't hear it, so I think you're fine.
Yay. The technology is getting really good these days. Yeah, so people who are going to rallies and marches and things like that, we learn very basic things about situational awareness, because you're in a loud, crowded place that may get a bad player, an instigator coming in at the worst, or sometimes it might not be for some malefic thing, but just basic safety practices of being around a crowd. If I remember being at a Pride March like 5 or 6 years ago in DC, and it was like right after one of the many streams of mass shootings that we hear about around the country, and a car very loudly backfired several times, and everyone panicked and ran. And that was the first time in my life that I'd ever seen, like, you see in the movies, like people like falling and like getting stepped on, and it was scary. So, very basic things like that. So, magic can help us stay grounded so that we don't panic in those situations. If you're going to a physical event like a rally or a march, I might, if I have access to the space, go there ahead of time and make offerings to the spirits of the land who inhabit that place and say, okay, please protect the people who are going to show up here tomorrow, and help us do what you can to get our message across, get our voice heard, ally with those spirits ahead of time so that hopefully they'll be on your side when the time for action comes.
I think that's so important. Oh my God, so important, because I can remember just being in strange situations, like calling on the spirits and things like that, can much less an activist situation where you're like, holy shit, things about to go down. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been a fan of yours for a while now. I've read a few of your books. I like.
And same for you.
I keep up with you on Twitter. Follow David on Twitter. He's so much fun to follow. I just follow everything he says. It's just so much fun.
My Twitter personality, to warn everyone, is very different from my hopefully put together public speaking personality.
I love it.
A lot of it is pictures of my cats, so please don't expect any grand philosophical diatribes there.
If you haven't already gotten this, Witchcraft Activism, every witch, gay, straight, LGBTQ, cis, trans, you need this manual. This is very helpful. It was so funny because when I first said, hey, I want to change up the show, 3 people said, Witchcraft Activism. They all said that. So thank you for writing this. Thank you for being our show. And Frater, Aaron, did you have any last things to say?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, David. It's so great to meet you and have a chance to talk to you in person here. Everyone, I have a new IG, which I've been separating my magical life into, which is Sacred Lore of Witchcraft. And similarly, I was incredibly influenced by bed knobs and broomsticks growing up as well. And more specifically, the scene where Paul finds out that the magical spell they've been seeking the whole movie is in his little children's book. And so back in 2016, I did a little presentation on our other co-host's show, Laura's Lunatic Mondays, about turning to fairy tales and folk tales and fiction as part of a sacred resource for our craft. And that's something I intend to get more into with that IG, which is why I've started a separate one. So follow me over there. I'll have that going by the end of the year.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all for coming. David, I can't thank you enough. Let's definitely stay in touch, and everyone have
the space.
Absolutely. Everyone have a good evening.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.